Blog Talk Radio.
Well, hello, Divas, and welcome to the Divas That Care Network. My name is Candace Gish, and I am so excited that each and every one of you has tuned in for today's program. We have an amazing guest today, and she's brand new to our Diva family, and you're going to love what she has to share with you. There's so many things out there that the Divas That Care are passionate about, and we want to share that with all of our amazing listeners that tune in to us. So for any of you that have just tuned in for the very first time, thank you so much. Our hashtag out there is Divas That Care, so make sure that you check that out and check out all the amazing women that are supporters of our program. Well, let's get started. Susan Wagner is my amazing guest today, and she has an amazing story that she's going to be sharing with all of our listeners today. So Susan, welcome to the Divas That Care.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be on the show.
Well, I am just beyond excited. For any of our listeners that have been with us for a long time, a lot of you know that I grew up on a horse ranch, and I have been around these amazing animals, most of my life. And Susan is going to be sharing her love of horses today on our program. So what she's going to be sharing is really dear to my heart, and I just can't wait for her to share it with all of you. So, Susan, tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about your story.
Well, like a lot of little girls, I fell in love with horses at a very young age, probably when I was like 3. I rode my first horse when I was 5 and grew up loving them and spending summers in the country with my grandparents where I would see horses living out in pastures as opposed to in the city where I was growing up, seeing them in these riding academies, standing in tie stalls, which always sort of bothered me. But when I saw them out in the pastures in the country, it kind of had a profound effect on me that this is the way they should live. And I grew up, I won't bore you with all those details of my education and all of that, but I ended up working in the racing industry, and because I was so amazed by the horses, and Secretariat was going for the Triple Crown. It was the first race that I ever saw was him winning the Belmont Stakes. And so the next day I got a job at the racetrack and spent years in it. And being as young as I was, you feel like you can change the world. And as much as I loved being around the thoroughbreds, there were things in the industry that I felt were a little bit dark, but I thought, well, I'm going to fix that. But I eventually left the industry, and after I left, I was working for a zoological institution, and there was a horse there named Gandalf who was in the petting zoo, and he was not a perfect candidate for that because he was sort of an old, stubborn horse who was biting the children, not a good thing in a petting zoo. So I heard them say, well, we'll just get rid of him. We'll just sell him for meat. And I thought, what is that? And somebody said, well, they eat horses in Europe and Japan, so we'll just get rid of him. And I was like in shock. I felt like somebody had, hit me over the head and thought, what is this slaughter industry? Here I'd been working in the horse industry and never heard of it. But I learned quickly about what that was all about, and so I bought that horse. And I had an ex-boyfriend who lived in Maryland who lived on a small farmette, and I asked him if he would take this horse since I didn't have room for him in my apartment in Queens. And so he did take the horse, and at the same time made a detour to Staten Island, also part of New York City, where a woman who had rescued a small miniature horse couldn't keep him. And so he picked up both horses, and Gandalf became the first horse I ever rescued from slaughter. And that totally changed my life. You asked in, your questionnaire, was there an aha moment? If there ever was one, for me, that was it, because I just couldn't believe it and thought, well, I've with my background in horses, I need to do something about this. So I ended up getting a job for a nonprofit organization, an animal protection organization that was based out of New York City. And the day that I started there, I realized, now this is what I need to do. I can use my experience to do this. But I didn't have any funding, didn't know about how to start a nonprofit. So I went back to school at night and took out books about starting a nonprofit, took classes on fundraising, and started the organization Equine Advocates with $3,000 from somebody I never met, and operated out of an apartment in Queens for the first 8 years. We had horses in 6 states, so I would spend half my week at the computer and half my week rescuing these horses from slaughter and abusive situations and keeping them in foster homes and boarding facilities primarily. So in 1997, I rescued that horse in 94 and started the organization 2 years later. That's how fast it was. And then a year after I founded the organization in 97, we were involved with our first major rescue operation that involved 27 camp horses and ponies, for which I had to go to court. I needed to raise the money to prevent them from being sold to a killer buyer. A killer buyer is a middleman for the slaughter plants. In this case, Canada, but most of our horses that still go to slaughter go to Mexico and Canada. And so I went to court and beat the killers with our bidding and rescued these 27 camp horses and ponies. And it was in a part of upstate New York where this was all over the media locally. And so this issue was in the newspaper every single day. And because of that, we garnered some of our very first supporters, which is basically how we were able to keep the organization going. And 8 years later, we were fortunate enough to be able to buy property in Chatham, New York, which is about 2.5 hours north of New York City in beautiful Columbia County. And we have 81 horses here now. Now we're 23 years old. And so that's how I started the organization. But my biggest frustration is that the main motivation for my starting Equine Advocates was to end horse slaughter. And we've, this country has come close to doing it, but we do not have a federal bill. What we do have is every couple of years we appropriate money through the Congress, and I mean the Congress does it, to defund horse slaughter plants. So we don't have, in other words, defund horse meat inspectors. So we closed our last operating horse slaughter plant in the United States in 2007. But because it's not illegal, we are still transporting horses over our borders live into Canada and Mexico for the purpose of slaughter for human consumption. And so until we have, federal legislation, we are never going to stop this horror show which is going on. And it's, there's so many aspects of it that affect everybody, even though, not everyone loves horses, although I have yet to meet anybody who doesn't respond to them in some way. But even for people who don't have horses in their lives, it does affect them in some ways.
Yes, it does. And you don't just do horses, you do ponies and donkeys and mules.
Yes, horses, ponies, donkeys, and mules. We have PMU mares and foals from Canada. We have 2 wild Mustangs here from Nevada and Montana. We have miniature horses and donkeys from petting zoos. We have thoroughbreds and standardbreds off the racetracks. We also get horses from the police who seize horses during cruelty raids. The horses that come here are horses who have nobody to speak for them. They're horses that are in terrible straits, and we also have a humane education center on the sanctuary grounds. So all of our horses are part of that education program because they come from situations that people need to be educated about.
Yes. Well, and I find it's great. It's an amazing thing that you're doing. To be doing it for 23 years, and for everything that you're doing, the education part of it, and really getting the word out there. You're an amazing advocate for horses. We have a lot of individuals we hear about that do stuff for dogs and cats, but we don't have a lot of people that we hear about, I guess, in social media that do horses. And I think this is amazing. And you getting the word out there, I think, is really relevant to society today. How are you getting out there in social media? How can we help you get your word out there more so that more people are aware of this? Because I don't think, unless you are really associated in the horse industry, the equine industry, that a lot of people know what's going on.
Well, social media is very important. I mean, I'm just not sure that, I'm embarrassed to say, may not be as proficient in that area as, say, other people. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter and Instagram, and we do our best to try to get the word out. And of course, we have a website which I think has a lot of good information. We hold events. Our biggest event of the season is coming up in Saratoga on Thursday, August 1st, and it's our 18th year of doing this. It's a fundraiser, but it also is a way for us to honor people in the horse industry who have made major contributions in the area of equine protection. For instance, one of our honorees, our main honoree on August 1st, is a woman named Stacy Hancock. Hancock is synonymous with horses, especially in the thoroughbred industry. But Stacy is also a co-founder and managing member of an organization called WOA, the Water Hay Oats Alliance, which is pushing to get rid of performance-enhancing drugs in the sport of horse racing, which is so necessary. We don't operate as they do in Europe, which has a much more level playing field than we do in this country. In the United States, there are 38 states that have racing, and they all have different rules and regulations with regard to drugs, which is not fair, and it promotes cheating. So what she is trying to do through legislation called the Horse Racing Integrity Act is to get racing under the auspices of the United States Anti-Doping Agency, which oversees every other major sport in this country, including football, baseball, basketball. Racing should be under the same national governing body, but it's not. And that is one of the reasons why, you may have read about all of these breakdowns that are happening out in Santa Anita and in other places. And part of that has to do with the fact that horses are getting drugs that make them not feel the pain that they have, so they're overextending and therefore breaking down. And if we had an organization like the National Anti-Doping Agency, I don't think you would see as much of that. She's also been very much opposed to horse slaughter, and back in 2005 lobbied heavily for the American Horse Slaughter Prevention Act with others, which that law passed in the House of Representatives, but it was blocked in the Senate. And that's one of the reasons we don't have a federal bill banning horse slaughter. We desperately need it. And I tell you the reason why. If you didn't have the option of horse slaughter, and this pertains to horses in Canada as well and any other country, if you don't have the option of horse slaughter, then people will stop indiscriminately and overbreeding horses, because they would have to think about, what will I do with this horse when this horse can no longer perform? A lot of these people don't want to take the time to, God forbid, find a kind home for the horse, or pay a licensed veterinarian to put the horse down humanely as we do for our dogs and cats, which horses deserve the same humane treatment. Instead, they get a horrific trip to the slaughterhouse, which I don't know if you've ever been to one. I have. It is a total betrayal of this animal that has built this country and other countries, including yours. So, if we got rid of slaughter, you would see a drop in the number of surplus horses being born every year, and therefore, in my opinion, have a much healthier horse industry as a result.
I agree with that completely. And you know what, and I think that that's what the awareness is all about, and educating people so that they really understand what's going on out there. I do want to kind of go back to something that you talked about a little bit earlier in the show. You talked about PMU, and I think that for any of our listeners that have just tuned in for the first time, or they're maybe not sure what that means, I'd love you to talk about that, because I know that you did they had some undercover work done, and you have some videos out there. So if we can kind of talk about that part of it, I think it would be quite interesting for our listeners today.
Okay. Well, first of all, PMU stands for pregnant mare's urine. And back in 1942, in Europe, it was discovered by a doctor that you could do hormone replacement through the urine of pregnant mares. And so a PMU industry developed in Canada, and some of it was in the United States also, but mostly in Canada, and mostly in Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. And what nobody knew is that women were taking this drug, Premarin, to treat the symptoms of menopause, but were not aware of the devastating side effects of it, which includes breast cancer, heart attacks, heart disease, strokes, clotting, and dementia. And all of those revelations came out around 2002 in something called the Women's Health Initiative, which was written about extensively in all the major newspapers, from the New York Times to the Toronto Sun, to all of them. And so back in 1942, Premarin was the only drug, I believe, on the market to treat the symptoms of menopause. And what the drug company did, they would convince doctors to put women on this drug when they went into menopause, whether they needed it or not. Now, we all know that some women get through menopause easily, but some really suffer with the night sweats and everything else. And so this drug was being dispensed, and then they also put Prempro on the market, which is central to hormone replacement therapy. And that has Premarin in it. And then they came out with patches and creams, and women were taking it. The advertisements for Premarin in the 1950s and 1960s were just, you couldn't put those on the air today. When I was in Canada, I had an investigator show me one of them. It showed a woman going through menopause who was not taking Premarin, and she had curvature of the spine. Her nose was practically touching the ground. She could hardly walk, and her husband didn't want to look at her, as opposed to the woman who was taking Premarin, who was jumping over streams and playing tennis. And it was just really offensive, but that's how they marketed and sold the drug. So coming up to today, there are now many other options to treat the symptoms of menopause that doctors say are better and safer. But what happens in the production of it, all of these mares, thousands of them, have to stand while they are pregnant in one spot, tied with chains around their necks in a tiny tie stall, where they stand on concrete for 6 months at a time, with plumbing attached to their urethras, collecting their urine. And their water intake is regulated, and in some cases they just don't get enough because they want the urine to be concentrated. Now, these mares, when they can't get pregnant anymore, a lot of them, most of them, are sold for slaughter. And their babies, which are, thousands of these babies are born every year, are considered byproducts and sent to feedlots to be fattened for slaughter. So when we started rescuing these horses in 2000, and we've rescued lots and lots of them, our biggest rescue operation was 46 mares, and that we rescued them between October of 2003 and March of 2004. And most of them were pregnant. And so I had needed to place a lot of them in other sanctuaries, but we still have lots of PMU mares and foals here. The foals are now, 15 and 18 years old, so they're not babies anymore. But the mares are branded. Most of them are, not all of them, but most of them are branded. A lot of ours have a number along their backs and the letter S in a square. The S in a square is a code for the farm, the name of the farm or farmer where they were, and the number relates to the stall that they're in. So a lot of these mares just drop dead while they're standing there. That's all they're used for. They're basically four-legged drug machines and not even treated like they're alive. So back in, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, in the late 90s, I went with a film crew undercover to investigate these PMU farms, and that report, which ended up on a nationally syndicated television program, won an ARC Trust Genesis Award for the producers of the show because they covered this. Because it's one of the dirty little secrets of the horse industry, of which there are many. But in today's world, there is no longer any reason for women to be taking drugs with PMU in it for health reasons. And, these are female horses being treated like things. And I think, it's offensive. Not only is it cruel, but it's no longer necessary. And I just want to tell you, just before the Women's Health Initiative started, and while it was in progress, the drug company, which was American Home Products, which changed its name to Wyeth, and then which merged with Pfizer, they didn't like the idea that people were American women who were who were and still are the main market for PMU drugs. We're seeing these foals, sold for meat and all of that. They didn't like the images of it, so they transferred most of the production to China, in a remote area not far from Mongolia. And, of course, there are no rescue groups there, no way to save these horses there. So they also eat horses in China, and they milk them. So you have these mares, 90,000 of them is what I was told. There's not a lot of new and accurate information out of China, but the original figures of what I heard, there were 90,000 mares standing on PMU lines in China, and there's no, they just live and then die there. So the PMU industry in Canada had diminished quite a bit when they transferred production to China. Now there are rumors that there's trouble in paradise. Of course, it has to be over money. And so Pfizer has expanded the PMU industry in Canada once again, mostly in Manitoba. So it's going on there again. But women need to know that that there's horse urine in these drugs, that horses are being tortured and die just to make them, and that they don't need to take PMU drugs in order to treat the symptoms of menopause.
Wow. Well, you know what? And we want to help you get that information out there because I think it's really important to know what's going on. Women, especially on the Divas That Care, are very aware of what's happening, and they want to be a part of that. So, I want to thank you because I think that we can lock arms with your organization and try to, help out in any way we can. And Susan, I hope that you come back on the program because I know that there's so much more that's going on in the equine industry that I think that I would love for you to share on our program.
I definitely will, and if I just might add this quickly, Dr. Ray Kelasamy is a wonderful humanitarian and a former Canadian physician. He's retired now. He led the charge against Premarin as a working doctor. He was the first one to publicly come out against using Premarin. His life was threatened. His farm was vandalized. But he's still an advocate, and we had him speak at the American Equine Summit that we held here a few years ago, and I'm going to send you his talk via a link to it so that you can share it, because he is our main contact when it comes to getting information about what's going on in the PMU industry in Canada.
I would love that. I would love to be able to share it with all of our listeners out there in Canada and the rest of the world. And we will definitely do that. Thank you so much, Susan. Last thing I want to ask you is, could you give your website address to all of our listeners today so they can go and check that out?
Sure. It's www.equineadvocates.org, and advocates is plural with an S, so it's equineadvocates.org.
Thank you so much. I thank you for being my amazing guest. And I want to thank all of our amazing listeners. It's because of you that we've continued to do this program for 9 years now. And we have amazing guests like Susan come onto our program to share what's going on out there. I hope that you take this program and you send it to all of your friends and family so that they know what's going on out there. I'm going to be posting all of this information on all of our social media links today. And you can always check out divasthatcare.com for any of our latest shows that are out there. Susan, thank you so much. I can't wait to have you back on. And you know what, to everybody out there, I hope that you all have an amazing day. And until next time, take care and make sure you do something kind for somebody. Bye-bye for now.